Star Wars is garbage. There, that's my hook. Now you have to stay. Instead of doing a video on why Star Wars is dying like I did for the MCU, I decided to focus on what I do like about this universe, the prequel trilogy. Though it's a controversial opinion, I think I speak for a lot of my generation when I say these films are underrated. In my opinion, it's time to abandon the thought that the originals are any better than the prequels. Here's why the prequel trilogy is my favorite Star Wars content. The first aspect that makes these films the best of Star Wars is the characters. Obviously, I only really have to explain why I prefer these characters to the ones in the originals, because nobody in the Tri-State universe, hopefully, would try to argue that the sequels have the best characters. Let's be honest, Obi-Wan and Yoda served their purpose in the originals, but they were made a lot better by the prequels. Showing how they were surrounded by Jedi for so many years makes it more meaningful when we see them completely isolated in the originals. It adds some very important context and depth that we didn't originally have. Obi-Wan really wasn't an amazing character in A New Hope. He began Luke's journey and had a good sacrifice, but he truly became a favorite for me and most people through the prequels. His journey of training Anakin for Qui-Gon, then to feel like he failed them both, is fantastic. And he's also one of the few Jedi I feel like with actual good morals. He's the one always trying to do the right thing and think through things, and he pays the price for it. Obi-Wan carries parts of this trilogy, and he is absolutely one of the best characters in Star Wars, if not number one, and it's because of the prequels. Then, of course, there's Anakin. Sure, it wasn't a great decision to have him as a 10-year-old in The Phantom Menace, but I believe his arc was actually well done. His slow fall to the dark side through temptation, and because of the injustice of the Jedi, is a really interesting story to follow. To me, it makes a backstory that was established in the originals into an even better arc. So overall, the prequels definitely have the best characters to me. There's Jar Jar and some underused villains, but the main characters get much better focus and actual character arcs, unlike Han Solo or Princess Leia, dare I say. Obi-Wan and Anakin in the prequels have the most interesting stories in Star Wars by far to me. The originals delivered us the most iconic stuff for sure, but there's more depth to the ones here. Next is the lightsaber duels and fight scenes. I hope nobody argues against these fights being the best. The ones in the originals are slow, dated, and kinda boring. The ones in the sequels are extremely forgettable and just not creative at all. But the ones in the prequels are all phenomenal. It's truly some of the only action in movies that I can think of that's actually very interesting and fun to watch. And all of these fights are so memorable. Duel of the Fates, the Geonosis one, Dooku versus Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda, and anything in Revenge of the Sith. These fights made Star Wars what it is. Another thing that makes the prequels the best of any of the trilogies is the time period of the story. There's a lot more interesting stuff happening with the Republic, Separatists, the Jedi Council, and the Sith than there is when there's the Empire or the First Order. This is when the ideas of the prequels prove themselves to be stronger than even what's in the originals. It's also the Clone Wars TV show that pushes it further and makes everything even better, but this time period had so much more to explore. The way that the Republic is corrupted, that the Separatists think they're the good guys, the flaws with the Jedi, and everything secretly being controlled by Palpatine, it's fantastic. In the rest of Star Wars, it's a very clear good versus evil, which honestly got kinda boring compared to this and the Clone Wars. Adding on to that is the world building. When I was rewatching the original trilogy, it surprised me how little it showed of how this world works. They tell us the Empire is in control, but we don't see what difference that makes to any normal person's life. That's when I realized I like the world of Star Wars, all because of the prequel trilogy. The world building that The Phantom Menace does is some of the best to me. We really get a clear idea of how things work in this galaxy, and it's great to learn about the Force and how people see the Jedi. Again, the time period and the world of the prequels is made with so much creativity that it makes any story set there the best of Star Wars in my opinion. It may have been pretty odd for the fans of the originals when it came out, but really this is Star Wars to me. For people who love the originals and then saw the prequels later, it makes sense that they wouldn't like these films, but for me, they represent Star Wars just as much as the originals. Every new thing in Star Wars automatically gets hate, and so did these films, but the ones who grew up with this generation of Star Wars love them. For the Disney sequel trilogy, I hope this doesn't happen, but I'll tell you why it won't. The prequels add so much to the world and make the originals better as a whole, while the sequels only ruin and tear down the previous trilogies. So my overall point is, it's time to accept that the prequels should be just as loved by Star Wars fans as the originals. This is my favorite Star Wars trilogy, and that's okay. Because when seeing the current state of a franchise like Star Wars, it's important to look back at projects made from passion like the prequels. What we have now is a lot of effortless, dry cash grabs from Disney, which may be technically better in some ways, but the prequels understand this universe and added to it in a valuable way. They should be appreciated more.